Thank you all for attending. Welcome to the second session of the seminar, Sudan at the Crossroads, which aim is to put the current war in Sudan into the context of recent decades and in the complex political history of Sudan. The first session was about Darfur, more specifically the social and political dynamics of conflict in this region. We had 3 speakers for this first session. And today we'll take maybe a broader national perspective on the political economy of Sudanese state and the historical, we'll study the historical roots of the current war, always in this attempt to put the current war into a broader context and perspective. To address this subject, we have 2 speakers. So 2 speakers. The first one, or maybe the second one, is Roland Marchal. So he will arrive. He's a French sociologist from CNRS and from the Center for International Studies at Sciences Po, Paris. And his research is specialized in civil wars in East Africa, mainly. And through this specialization, he analyzes the state formation. So it will be like a really, he has been studying Sudanese political dynamics for over 30 years. So it will be a great historical insight in this process of state formation. And after Roland, before I don't know yet, we'll have Raga Makawi. She's a British Sudanese researcher, editor, and activist based in the UK. Her postgraduate research at Oxford University investigates the political ideology driving the emergence of new civic formations after the 2018 Sudanese revolution. She's also a researcher at the Conflict and Civicness Research Group at the London School of Economics, and she's an in-house editor at African Arguments book series, where is published was published in 2022 a book entitled Sudan's Unfinished Democracy: The Promise and Betrayal of a People's Revolution, that Raja co-written. And she's also an editor at Small Arms Survey and the Africa Journal. She also previously worked at the Sudan Desk Office for the Rift Institute and the United Nations. And she has bylines in the media, different media, such as Africa is a Country, The Economist, Al Jazeera. So we'll have 2 presentations. These 2 presentations will be about like 30 minutes. And after each presentation, we have like 5-10 minutes for short and precise questions on the presentations to let some time for a general debate afterwards. So,
just to explain who you are, you will.
Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself before introducing everything. The session. So my name is Corten Perez-Ruiz, and I'm a PhD student at PRODIG and Géographicité. Doing my PhD with Alice Franck and Eric Denis. It's about urbanization and red bricks building materials in Khartoum and Cairo. So very pleased to animate this session. And so I think we'll start with Raja, if you're ready.
I will look at the QR. Yes, no, we can start with Roland.
We'll start with Roland.
Sorry, Raja.
Thank you for waiting.
No problem at all. It's okay.
For attending.
I apologize to everyone. Please don't shoot me. My camera is not lost. So, peut-être que tu peux t'asseoir en table, la nouvelle antenne, c'est ensemble.
Oui, de l'eau.
Merci d'avoir accepté.
Oui.
Dedans, au séminaire. Corten vient d'introduire et d'introduire le séminaire.
Comment?
Je dis Corten vient d'introduire, dire qui étaient les... On vient de commencer.
Voilà, oui. Peut-être, ouais. Je crois qu'on peut juste décaler un petit peu la caméra.
Ouais.
Voilà.
So yeah, I was saying, so we'll start with Roland for about 30 minutes, and then
When he will be ready.
yeah. Regret. And yeah, so 30 minutes of a presentation, 30, 40 minutes. And then some questions, some precise questions.
Yeah. Actually, I'm better on Q&A than on presentation. That's my presentation because I got distracted by another seminar. But okay, I wrote a piece, and I think the mind behind this effort is even online. He's the man responsible for my camels. It's called Suleiman Baldo. So he's supposed to correct the many mistakes of my writing and then publish it maybe sometimes next week. So you will get more on Chad Sudan relations at this very time. Let me since my duty is to talk about the all good past, which means the bloody dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir. Maybe let me start by saying a few words about the National Islamic Front. In the 1980s, I think we didn't figure out the originality of this movement. And I say it ironically, but not so much so, because, compared to what we got after the global war on terror took off, the National Islamic Front was, quite a singular object. And whatever he did later on, I would start by saying, there are few striking differences between the National Islamic Front and other political groups in Sudan that deserve some attention. The first one is very simple, is that the National Islamic Front wanted to reform the society. Okay, I say that because so many other groups claim to rule the country, but are not very explicit about what they want to achieve. Traditional parties, leftist parties, and so on. So the National Islamic Front, at least, had a clear vision. Moreover, the National Islamic Front, and I know what the audience is here, the National Islamic Front wanted to modernize the Sudanese society. And this modernization means and meant that youth and women will get a role. This, again, it's quite a difference compared to other groups. And a clear illustration of this gap is just what happened in 1985. This sanctified intifada against Mary. If you look what happened in the streets, okay, two groups were prominent. Not the famous, middle or upper middle class who basically, ruled the movement and led the movement and then got the political reward. There were two groups that were in the streets fighting the police and the army and got nothing except from the Islamists, which is quite paradoxical. One is the street kids, the poorest people who had nothing to lose and who were ready to, launch skirmishes with the police and do everything with stones and sticks and get shot. The other one was the youth, the students, the university people who as well were certainly more already protest. That's good. That's a way to wake you up. And then that wanted to that were there. After the Limeri gone, actually they didn't get anything from the traditional parties. And the Islamists, when the National Islamic Front where when they set up formally the organization, actually proved that they took the message very seriously. So women got the right to appear. I'm not saying to rule, let us not be extremist, but at least to appear. So there was a show with women. There was as well a show with teenagers and young students and so on. And that was extremely a clear gap with other political parties. Now, beyond that, I think what always struck me about those people is the fact that they had an understanding, and they were not the only one, but they had a clear understanding of how to rule Sudan. There were a few things they learned from their history that shouldn't have surprised us in the 1990s. One is linked to colonial history. And if we go back to colonial history, we see how the Brits were able to build actually the Unionist Party, and then to build the Umma Party. Okay, of course they weren't alone. Sudanese are the main actors of their history. I'm not saying that, but certainly the way they offer or give lands, business opportunities, provided the means not only to cultivate a bourgeoisie from one party or the other, depending the timing, but as well to get businessmen, more than women, funding the political activities. And it was very clear for the NIF very early when they took over that this was a priority. So the coercion, the arbitrary arrest, the disappearance, the torture of businessmen was not only related to their political affiliation. It was related to the fact that Sudan needed a vacuum, and this vacuum to be filled by Islamist businessmen. And that was a policy, a real policy that was enforced at all costs. And it took different steps. We could go back maybe in the Q&A on that, but they were extremely effective on that. Of course, when you want to, this idea to create a bourgeoisie that is symbiotically linked to the state is not new. It happened in many different situations. Niger, under Kouché, for instance, since we are in the French-speaking room, was an example. There were Somalia under Mohamed Siad Barre as well. What they did, and again was something very modern, is it took different steps and they used instrument of modernity. And I'm provocative because I want you to understand that what happened in 2019 wasn't exactly what so many people wrote. What the example, what they took as a good tool was the NGO. You had in the 1980s a long, and profound and deep thinking about among the Islamists about why humanitarianism should be the monopoly of Westerners. And they started developing not so much the old Islamic tradition of helping with zakah and so on. They developed new NGO, proper NGOs that were working the same style, quote unquote, as like Western NGOs, but with an ideological agenda or a political agenda. And it happened, as we saw when President Mubarak was nearly killed in Addis Ababa in June 1995, a security agenda. So they took this form. They took as well, more private firms, holdings, like high-tech, for instance, played such a role. And of course, they are the ones who invested first and with great success in the new information technologies. That's why today most of what is called internet is under the hands of the Islamists. Okay, so they had really a vision, and they were very smart on that. They as well understood well, and that's part of Turabi's dedication to money, the Islamic banking. Because Islamic banking is not something funny just to make some PhD student busy. It's right now, when you look, the expansion of Islamic finance is something extremely important, and is very dynamic and moving towards something that we should assess. And I would say, do not look Saudi Arabia, look Malaysia, look Indonesia, look, and I think this was something very important. Another point that was related to their history was Sudanese are not Arabs, or let us say they are much better than Arabs. And Turabi knew, because of the colonial history, and this is really something shared by many political organizations in Sudan. I'm just out of a Chatham House seminar, so I wanted to use words I can't use in an academic setting, but let us say they do not like that much the Egyptians, okay? And there are a lot of good reasons for that I share with them. So it's linked to the history of the Islamist movement in Sudan, the split with those who wanted to follow the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And Turabi had been always very clear in his writing, in his interviews, that his ambition, his goal, wasn't to be the most vibrant branch or associate of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. He wanted something else, something different, something that would be more global and more African. And so when you see at the beginning of the regime, the foreign policy paid a lot of attention to the situation in Nigeria, to the situation in Chad, to what was going on in West Africa, as well as in Turkmenistan. So they weren't those who were focusing on what Cairo would say, what is happening in Syria, and what is happening in the Gulf. Okay, Gulf, what means money and so on, but they hadn't much expectation on those countries. And what they were trying to do was to reach out countries that were always seen as not so prominent in any Islamist agenda. And their relation with Anwar Ibrahim, who today is the Prime Minister of Malaysia, illustrate this openness. Okay, and I'm very provocative, because I believe when you want to fight your adversary, you need to know it much better than a cliché. And a last point is, of course, the control of the relation with the security and military apparatus. And I would say there were the convergence between two really very different, trajectories. On one side, what was available politically in the great region. Okay, Baas, a great model of civilian regime, okay? You had Egypt, already a good model of civilian regime, and that's all. Okay, so the idea that if you want to, perform, you need to have your contingent within the security and the military, was something that was just a finding looking superficially at the political developments in the region. Moreover, Turabi, we shouldn't forget it, Turabi wrote his PhD on a wonderful young man called Lenin. and Lenin was very clear about what we need to do and how we need to do. So there was this discussion on performing, and of course, this policy did not start in 1985, not in 1987, not in 1989. It started under Nimeri, and it was, again, a policy that was enforced, whatever was happening, current events and so on. You need to build your connections, and so build it. I think an additional support for this policy came from Iran. We shouldn't forget that a number of those key figures who became ministers, who were very busy with this musical chairs system to appoint ministers for the following 20 years, were basically people who had been trained in Iran, like Nafi, Ali Nafi, like Awad el-Jaz, and so on and so forth. So you had quite, and of course the Iranians of the guardian of the revolution were very confident that ideology is good, but controlling a force is much better, and of course they took that very seriously. Now they had as well another consideration that proved that they were really dangerous because they were very smart. Is when they made the coup in June 1989, the involvement of the army was minimal. We know now, we have descriptions. I mean, a few hundred soldiers or military were involved, but and they took the time. And I was in Khartoum at that time, and I remember at first, for a couple of days, I would say for Sudanese, a couple of weeks for foreigners, it wasn't clear who was behind the coup. And the thing was that since in the region military powers are legitimate, being a Praetorian regime means that nobody is going to contest you. And this is what they got from Cairo. The support provided by the Egyptian state at the very beginning was very helpful for the Islamists in Khartoum to, let us say, convince many officers who were in a place in the countryside were reluctant to follow Khartoum because they saw these, we know them. They are not the nationalist religious people they mention on TV. And so they needed time to convince them and to make sure that they couldn't act. And then when the truth was known, it was too late. And that was, and at the same time, then they used another card, which was Libya. And I think one of the aspects that we should one day, there are, most of the people wrote, talk a bit about that, but the Libyan, how the regime tried to get Libyan support at first. All these rhetorics about Congress, popular Congress, came from somewhere. It wasn't really the idea of, let's just say, the mere idea of Turabi. It came as well because they wanted to seduce a man, very rich, a bit whimsical, but certainly willing to spend some money in Sudan. And this man was Gaddafi. So as I try to describe it, the regime itself, and the last point on this is, at the difference of the bars, the NIF was not, I would say, culturally controlled by the military. It's something very important, especially when you look at other military Islamist organizations, in the sense that when you had the debate in maybe you remember, well, I'm not sure you remember, in 1988, there was a discussion to Sadek El-Mahdi was certainly a great man, but he wasn't a great politician, and he wasn't certainly not a great prime minister. So in 1988, at one point, he had to propose to the NIF to be part of the cabinet. And there was a split in the leadership. Turabi, for his own experience, wanted to be part of the game, but Ali Osman, Nafi, all the other chaps were very reluctant or even opposed to that. So the discussion on the scenario came, okay, let's go with you enter the cabinet, but then if we fail to change things, then we will resort to a coup. And as you know, what happened is that sometimes in months later, in June, actually that was the very explanation of the coup. The day the coup happened was supposed to be the day Sadek El-Mahdi would have announced the freezing of the quote-unquote September laws and to put into and to enforce what was the Mirghani agreement with the SPLA. So the sense that the quote-unquote Islamic laws were in danger, and so they had to move was then decided, and then the coup occurred. There were, I think, 2 or 3 people in the leadership who opposed the coup. One being very Tayyeb Zain Abdi, and the other one, Hassan Meki, who was very, very well known among those working on the Horn of Africa because he was the expert on the Horn, whatever expertise means. And so they decided, and later on, they had a specific policy regarding the military. It is, again, something very important to understand, especially after 2019, is the NIF put in place a policy on how to manage the military. The military stay as an institution. So compared to the state apparatus, in the military, you couldn't just get promoted because you were from the right political trend. You needed to follow the usual promotion ranks and so on. And the whole discussion was how to avoid integrating into the military, especially at the officer level, opponents. So you had this vetting, and then the study at the military academy, and so on and so forth. But the army, up to the end, stay as somewhat different from the political party. So it's not China, clearly not. And as well, but with a process that made this organization even less and less representative than that it was at the beginning of the coup. And why so? Because to get into the military academy, you need a vetting, and the vetting basically was to look the family, know whether he had brothers, cousins, first cousins who were opponents of the regime, and those who were, guaranteeing the value of the candidate were often, Islamists themselves, very often in the army. So you had the creation of a caste. I'm not saying that before it was a genuine national army with everyone represented, but certainly he hardened a certain social selections that we saw so much in the very late years as they belong. I mean, it's an approximation. Yes, let us say it this way, but it's not untrue. Okay, and this, okay, that's the, let us say, the intellectual framework and so on. So now when we look this regime, it wasn't the same all the time. I used to say that Omar al-Bashir was the spokesperson for the regime up to 2003. Spokesperson in the sense that he was president, so on a protocolar basis, he was the one giving views, announcing policies and so on. But most of the time, let us say 90% of the cases, what he was saying was really, what he was reading was a statement written by others, and he was happy to know it just at the time he was reading, okay? There were a few exceptions, one being the support provided by Sudan to the invasion of Kuwait. Turabi met many officials, foreign diplomats at the time it happened, so early August 1990, if I'm not wrong, and stated that Sudan will keep neutral. But Omar al-Bashir went on TV and just, made the statement, which surprised everyone, Turabi first and foreign diplomats as well. And so the reward was that Sudanese were working in Kuwait City were allowed to leave, or even in Iraq were allowed to leave with cars that were stolen to that place, okay? So it was a very funny, and maybe at the time nothing was funny in Khartoum, to see that you had so many, big American cars, what you see in all movies with your best actors, except that there wasn't fuel for those cars. But you had all those things, and that was the reward given to the returnees, those Sudanese who went back home and then stay idle in Khartoum or Port Sudan, because there wasn't much to do anyway, and there wasn't fuel for the car. So there were those discrepancies. What happened in 2003 is 2003, as I used to say, just after 2002. That shows that I went to school. Thank you so much to applaud me. And so 2002, you have the beginning of the talks in Naivasha with SPLA. And the government delegation is led by Ghazi Salahuddin. Now, Ghazi, maybe called the spirit of the time, which means Sudan was getting hard. Sudan has restarted its cooperation with FBI, CIA, and so on. He has normalized somewhat with Egypt. So the future looked very bright. So why to be flexible with those bloody southerners? And of course, that wasn't the deal, really. And it took months for Ghazi to understand that what he was doing wasn't exactly what was expected by the US and others. So eventually he was kicked out, and Ali Osman Mohamed Taha then went to Nairobi, and they started this long series of discussion that ended with a double project. One was the CPA as we know it today, and the other one was a kind, never written, but a kind of, let us say, gentleman agreement that maybe both of them could be a team that could lead Sudan, I'm not saying which Sudan, and get rid of Omar al-Bashir, okay? And of course, when we see the side casualties of the Darfur conflict, Ali Osman is one of them. Okay, so now if we look the first period, the period where Bashir was the spokesperson, to say it this way, in the sense that he wasn't the one really defining, discussing policies, but the one announcing them. I think there were different. There were one period which is the harshest. From 1989 up to 1993, where really it was so difficult for Sudanese. And I say Sudanese because you know, even if you weren't an opponent, you could be targeted and you could disparate, ghost houses and so on and so forth. You have this idea. What is important for maybe to understand is the level of coercion evolved with time. In the same thing happened in the 1910s, where there were periods where you had the feeling that you were very much in a police state, on other moments where you had a kind of feeling that you could breathe, that actually the regime was more open, that was claimed internationally and so on. And then you had, wow, I'm just at the beginning. Then you had the other period that lasted not long, I think 93, 97. And I think from 97 up to 2003, the real stake or the real dynamic was the fight between Turabi and the others. And what was at stake was a constitutional reform by which party Turabi would have given back, let us say, the decision to the party, would have, against the state apparatus, would have marginalized all the just younger generation than his own, like the Ali Osman, Nafis, Qazi, and so on, and would have promoted a new generation, much younger, who would be absolutely ready to obey him, to do maybe the same, maybe something different. We don't have an idea. Nevertheless, he was kicked out in December 1999. He tried to set up a new political party, you know, and then he ended up in jail in 2001, in, I think, February. Now, this period is basically built on the growth of this Islamist entrepreneurship, with something that is at first Islamist NGOs and so on, then private companies, companies that were handled by the army, the security apparatus, and increasingly became handled as private companies. And to a certain extent, it shouldn't be a surprise. If we look at Sudan economy, the main economic operator is actually the state. It's the only one who got money. Therefore, to build and to cultivate this relation with the state was something everyone was doing, even under the previous regimes, and so they did it. Of course, the oil revenues changed much, or let us say, maybe foster dynamics that were already at play. And this lasted up to 2011, where in 2011, I think the independence of Somaliland, the independence of South Sudan, another seminar, the independence of South Sudan, maybe that could be a discussion later on. It took really, I think, Khartoum by surprise. It's something amazing in the sense that, from 2002, 2003, everybody was talking about the quest for independence for South Sudan. And of course, okay, there was the war in Darfur, but in Khartoum, the war in Darfur was not affecting everyone. What affecting the Darfuris, but the others didn't pay much attention. What was important is South Sudan, because oil. And actually, you had a moment where many economic operators saw that maybe we could make a deal. Maybe there is an alternative to secession. And they wanted the government in Khartoum to move positively with Salva Kiir, and because Salva Kiir was much easier person than Garang, and do things so that the issue of the referendum maybe would have been delayed or would not happen. Everything was, all that was a dream, but the feeling was that we could do something else than what is written. And it did not happen because Omar al-Bashir is Omar al-Bashir. They were confident that nothing would happen. And I think this confidence was reinforced by the fact that from 2005 to 2010 or 11, they managed to gather Sudan. The alliance between NCP and the regime was something surprising. And the Darfuris, one day they should talk about that because they pay quite a price for, being a parameter in the negotiation between the two regimes, and of course they lost. Now, as I have 5 minutes, after 2011, the logic became different, and to a certain extent proved how Sudan is resilient internationally. And I believe, so you have the expert right to me, so I can't talk about that, but really I think gold became, gold was nothing, then became a prominent sector for export. What is as well very interesting is the attitude of the Gulf states, because we always intend that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar paid a lot of money for this regime. Actually, it's not true. It's true on certain limited period. And we could say, and again, I said to be provocative to make sure that our good friends stay awake, far from us, is at the end, UAE had promised so much money and did not pay. And that was sometimes, I think, in December 2018, where some people start walking in the streets of Khartoum, and this time no more for romantic moves, but really for protest. And so it is interesting, and there are figures, actually, there is a good article on this, to see that the Gulf state, even at the time Sudan became involved in Yemen, the Gulf states, in Saudi Arabia and UAE, were not were extremely cautious with Omar al-Bashir and thought that this man couldn't be trusted. And again, and this is linked not only to him, because, Omar al-Bashir was playing Iran for a long time, as they restart playing it now. Qatar, again, even at the time, the relations between the Gulf states were pretty bad. And they had the feeling that, and then as well, Saudi Arabia versus UAE. So they had the feeling that this man is trying to divide us. And, it doesn't belong to us. It's under us. So how does he dare doing that? And so the contempt towards Omar al-Bashir, the distrust, I think was such that he explained why the Gulf states actually weren't very active, even after 2019, because they wanted to look the new regime. They take a number of steps, but eventually, we are not as generous as certainly both Hamdouk and Burhan, so they should be. And this is, again, a consideration that we should keep in mind, because it proves that the solution, at least the economic solution for the war in Sudan, won't be brought by the region. Okay, and this, it won't be brought by China. We could talk about that in the and it won't be brought from the region. So that should have left an avenue for Western states to act. And what we could say safely is that they haven't moved much. I will stop here because of time. I'm ready for another half an hour as soon as you want.
Thank you very much for this talk. I think we'll have some direct questions for like 5 or 10 minutes, really quickly, so we can go on with the second presentation. Maybe some questions in the room or in the virtual room. Some direct questions, understanding questions. So then we have like a greater debate with after the intervention of Raja.
Maybe I can start with a question for the time that the other think about.
Yeah.
Roland, you talk a lot about the National Islamic Front at the beginning as a political party, with a clear vision, with a clear understanding of where they wanted to go, controlling some part of the state, controlling with modern tools, modern society and everything. But this vision have eroded a little bit during the time. We can see that after there was this idea of development triangle of Hamdi, all this evolution, and those. How can you react about this?
Okay, it's one of the many things I should have said, but I have talked too much as always. The thing is, the experience of IF is very interesting, and is the book written by Mahbub. It's a problem you face in any society, is the relation between such kind of political party and the state apparatus. What happened in the early 1990s is because the NIF, they were a tiny minority and so on. So most of them got promoted into the state apparatus. Many of the youngsters actually got killed in the jihad in the south, okay? And so what you had is many people then saw that, okay, we control the state, so what is the point? We have a new Islamic constitution, Sharia, and so on. And the party became completely powerless. And there is always, and this is something even French people could reflect on, a discrepancy between what the party is sociologically, what he wants ideologically, and what the state apparatus is. It's not the same time, it's not the same kind of institution, and basically they got swallowed by the state. That's why, when people look at the policy against South Sudan, the construction of militias, and then in Darfur with the Janjaweed and so on, I'm very, they raise the Arabist and pan-Arabist and how do you say, supremacist ideologies and so on. I'm not denying that this existed. What I'm saying is, if you look the archaeology of coercion by the state in Sudan, you find the militias. And that is linked to the poverty of the Egyptian or Ottoman colonial domination, and as well of the Brits. Okay, so the question is much deeper than only blame the state because it's ruled by Islamists. The question is why, and this is another question that you could have raised about why the population in Khartoum in Central Eastern Sudan was so indifferent to what was happening in Darfur, is basically because the way order was maintained was consistent with what they knew about a normal state working in Sudan. And this is very, and when I see all those debates, today I'm very, I'm extremely cautious about what may come, because when you analyze the Sudan armed forces, what they are doing today is just trying to repeat that. And the idea that, okay, the RSF was the infantry for the South is true, but this is only the tip on the iceberg. The whole iceberg is the state doesn't know how to do, else they don't know any other way to to wage a war than to use those forms. And it's what they have, and what I personally found amazing, and that's why I'm so provocative, is because the Southerners faced that for decades. Nobody talked about. And then suddenly Darfur, as if it were new. It wasn't new. So why people did not, discuss the continuity of a state behavior? That's a question that we have to ask those civilian forces in Sudan.
There's the hand. Manas. No, it's on the screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Other questions, or should we maybe just
I have to continue the conversation after I will.
Okay. So let me. I'm sorry. So the NCP. So you had this on the fight between Ali Osman and Turabi. Okay, you could say it was about power, but it was about the role of the party versus the state. Okay. Now, when you see what happened after 2003, you had a very short period in which the Bashir, the new president, if I may call it this way, needed some backing, and he took it from the party. And then I would say after 19, it's very sketchy demonstration, but after 1911, to give a date, I believe the party was at best a place where Bashir could recruit people, but the party wasn't playing the role he had played for the 21st years, different roles, but different role of this. But the guilty, the weakness or the mistake of the what happened after 2019 is the NCP is not only the Islamist, and everybody knew that very well. So the question was when the civilians took over in August. Well, the civilians took over. The civilians got a government under scrutiny of the military, which is not the perfect definition for a revolution. And after, in August 2019, the question was, okay, what should we offer to the NCP supporters? Because they hadn't anymore room for political expression. The NCP was prohibited. People were, who were trying to, with that background, to raise their voice were put in jail and so on. So, but the constituency, the rural constituency, even in the peripheries, the so-called peripheries. So how could we integrate those people in the new political process and detach them from their former affiliation? And this discussion never took place up to the coup. And the regime now is playing this card to recruit its new militias. The regime, the SAF. Okay, so we see that there are a lot of things that weren't thought, and I could say, no, I won't say because I am really upset so many people, but.
Yeah. We should go on with
don't move beyond your provocation.
Hard strike.
Harry asking for it. Harry Cross.
Suleiman Baldo also.
Suleiman.
Yeah, this is not a question, just a couple of comments about two striking connections between what is happening today and what happened during the period of the power grab by the National Islamic Front, or the Sudan Islamist movement, as it was known at the time, which is, when you look at the coup d'etat of 1989, it was launched to preempt the signing of an agreement that would have frozen the Islamist laws and blocked the rise of the Islamist movement to power through the manipulation of religion. And if you like, to take, fast forward to the coup d'etat of October 2021, it was engineered to preempt the signing or the implementation of the political framework agreement. So the Islamist movement from that time in 1989 to 2021 is basically a militarist ideological movement which is ready and willing to use military power to grab authority and to preempt its adversaries from pursuing another project, which is democratization in both instances, and one that would have made Sudan more of a secular state. So this is an important connection to make between 1989 and basically the coup d'etat. Even this war was, provoked according to credible reports and is fed, as we can observe daily, and fueled by the Islamist movement, because this is their only way to come back to power, including by reviving, the mass mobilization at the time in 1990s, Popular Defense Force. Today, it's a popular resistance. So it's the same mechanisms being repeated again, as if these 3 decades didn't exist. So this is one side of it. The other is why, when we ask ourselves why the army is, in this very weak posture vis-a-vis the offensive of the rapid support forces. And this is because, of course, of what Roland mentioned about, the role of the party or the ideological movement vis-a-vis the state apparatus. The Islamist movement has marginalized the army, made of it an Islamist militia of a sort. Turabi had a whole ideology about there is no need for a modern army. We should have a people's army, and therefore this mad project of militarizing all Sudanese through the Popular Defense Forces, their indoctrination into the ideology of the movement, and then in case that we need to go to war or to defend the homeland, we can call on this people's army. The marginalization of the army mechanically occurred with the creation of the special forces of the NIS and with the creation of the border guards in 2006, the rapid support forces in 2013, and on and on. So much so that the current Sudan army is the shadow of what it used to be before the 1989 coup, and has no, the traditions, the military traditions, and the discipline of a national army that could have, easily dealt with an armed rebellion such as the RSF. So all these connections are there and explain to us, actually, there is a certain continuum between that moment until today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Roland, for the presentation. So we'll go with the presentation of Raga, if it's okay for you, for approximately half an hour or two.
Yes, I think I'll be done in less than half an hour.
As you wish.
Thank you, first of all, for having me to deliver this presentation on the political economy of Sudan at this current juncture of the 2023 war. So when speaking of the current dynamics of the 2023 war, it is important to consider the milestone of the revolution and the previous uprisings before it as conjunctures in the failed political economy of the country and its struggle to develop an alternative governing model. Now, of particular note is the role of the 2018 revolution in synthesizing a political discourse and project that speaks to the economic failures and the political violence that has underpinned Sudan's governance models for decades. Internal debates within the revolution on what freedom, peace, and justice, its main slogan, means beyond the expansion of power and wealth sharing formulas to include representation from provincial and civic actors, to actually seriously addressing issues around food insecurity, land rights as a catalyst for never-ending ethnic warfare in the peripheries, and institutional reform. So again, it's important to note, even though it might not be as publicized as it should be, that the political project, the Sudanese 2018 political project, did include within it a very clear kind of alternative political discourse or political vision with a clear discourse on what it means for Sudan to become to kind of to espouse civic politics beyond just peace settlements. The political economy model in Sudan is one that is based first and foremost on contracting violence to small-scale actors in order to manage extractive projects. So that's how the model works. It's got four factors driving the process and a single solution, always. It kind of runs on a loop. Now, I'm going to outline these before I move on to speaking about the particular case of how it works in Northern Sudan, where I'm kind of, doing my research, where my research is focused. Now, the concept of contracted violence is kind of predominant and always present. And while the current situation with the level of violence meted out by the RSF might seem to most unprecedented, as Professor Marchal has mentioned, it is a case of being less managed to scale, as was the case in other locales, Darfur and otherwise. Now, earlier cases of contracted violence include the use of militias in overseeing large-scale productive projects. And by productive here, I mean productivity as a measure of GDP and foreign exchange. These include agriculture, mining, and livestock, large-scale activities. Now, the urban economy in Khartoum operates obviously on a different political economy model, and so might not be particularly aware of the violence that underpins the management of the peripheral economy. These differentials showed in the political discourse of the movement, and in fact drove to a large degree cleavages within it. Though, this situation might change post-war. At the heart of the political economy project is the reordering of land relations, which in turn tends to induce communal and by extension ethnic tensions. Agriculture, mining, livestock, and of course the place and use of labor, whether local or imported, in driving profit against different levels of coercion. A clear example is obviously that of Darfur historically, but then similar policies are kind of being adopted in North Sudan, especially with mining in the areas of Northern Sudan, specifically Nubia. And you can see it as well in state-sponsored agricultural projects around Dongola. I'm really sorry. I'm being hosted at a friend's house in the UK, and I've got his key and he's at the door now. So I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to run and open the door for him. You can just excuse me for a second. I'm really sorry.
No problem. Yeah.
It's my solidarity. We have all to take our phones.
Yeah.
Roland, faut tourner, je pense. Voilà.
Okay, I'm back. I'm really sorry about this. Of course, it had to happen that way.
No problem.
So where was I?
You were in the north of Sudan. with the
Speaking of agricultural projects in Dongola.
Yeah. So I think I covered land relations. Now moving on to the third factor, it's financing. So the means by which these extractive activities are being financed is another thing to consider. Sorry, just 1 second. Gather my thoughts, just 1 second.
Okay.
C'est bien, ça nous met à l'aise pour nos problèmes d'organisation.
Okay, back. So the third factor is financing. The means by which these extractive activities are being financed, mostly through violence, which was needed to manage the popular unrest resulting from the development of these particular kind of projects around Sudan. So there is a specific need to look at foreign direct investments, mostly from the Gulf, so Gulf capital, as well as the concept of political funding, which is basically what the Gulf kind of tended to pay al-Bashir back in the day to bail him out, to bail out the struggling regime. Professor Roland did mention that we need to be a little bit careful with in considering how much money actually came in through Gulf networks, but still the role of financing, whether through foreign direct investment or through political bailing, or the political funding to bail out struggling regimes, should also be looked at attentively. Now, the fourth and last point is a crucial one, and it relates to the place of labor in this formula, in the political economy formula. The crisis of a saturated market in Sudan, not just a local one, but regional, as opportunities to export labor to the Gulf has also dwindled, which means that there is a never-ending surplus of labor, of Sudanese labor, which is mostly low-level education for a service industry that continues to be excluded as the international and regional security regime strengthens its grip over the region. So basically, we had a situation over the last 30 years under al-Bashir's regime and the Arabization education model, where people were trained in universities at a kind of less than a professional level, and it was a training made to export them basically to the Gulf service-based markets. But this has become in the past in the past recent years has become less and less of a possibility. Now, consequently, this ever-expanding local labor surplus is being absorbed into a local and regional market of illicit activities, especially an informal mining sector, which is linked to the formal one, to the formal economy, and kind of drives to a huge degree local financing and productivity. Now I'm going to come to mention in more detail how the mining sector works in Northern Sudan. Now at the state level, the only available solution to this economic political crisis is peacemaking. And this is despite the fact that in the last 20 years, I mean, since CPA or even before it, there is no clear evidence or no positive correlation between peacemaking and state building. The revolution's discourse itself on peace as a means of achieving lasting political stability points out to the inherent contradictions of the processes that produce settlements. So the fact that power is pegged to violence, and that the peace process itself is externally financed and beholden to foreign policy interests, kind of undermines or kind of exacerbates the crisis of sovereignty, which is at the heart of Sudan's many problems. Okay. Now, I've kind of loosely laid about the problematic political economy model of Sudan pre-war. Now I want to highlight some of the examples from the specific political economy of North Sudan post-war, which should be seen as an extension of the history of extractive and underdevelopment policies of Sudan overall. So again, the North Sudan political economy model will be developed on the basis of the 4 factors outlined previously, which is agriculture, mining activities, labor, and then the 4th one, I'm going to speak a little bit about illicit activities, specifically smuggling. So with agriculture, most agricultural projects are concentrated around the plains of Dongola. These are mostly state-led, massive, large, and state-led. Post-war, there is no clear information about their management or productivity, especially in light of the crippling shortages of input resultant from the disruption in commodity financial chains following the fall of Khartoum. Markets in Dongola, markets in Dongola specifically, and in North Sudan generally, are supplied mostly through an extended smuggling network spanning Libya and Egypt. Most commodities in local shops bear their labels, as well as the added smuggling tax. So this basically just means that you buy, basic commodities like sugar for ridiculous prices. Local farmers who usually produce for sustenance, as a response to this, local farmers who usually produce for sustenance have increased their yield as much as possible under certain circumstances to cater to the expanding local needs generated by displaced communities, whether they came in from Khartoum or other places. Crisis in storage, transport, and other infrastructure-related impediments have made it impossible for the public to access these products at reasonable prices. So again, even though local farmers or local producers have started to produce more with the intention of providing for a local market, the market itself has not kind of responded to this increase in productivity. The prices are still quite high, and this has to do with the dysfunctionality of the overall infrastructure. The market infrastructure. Alternative forms to achieving food security for a starving post-war population in the absence of any humanitarian intervention is vulnerable to capture by pre-existing predatory practices. So the fact that there is no infrastructure, market infrastructure to facilitate the movement of goods, its storage, and other factors just basically means that these products are kind of, open to kind of, being traded in a predatory market where, traders in crisis basically kind of slap more expensive labels on them. Basically, they charge more for transport, they charge more for fuel that it's difficult to come by, and so on and so forth. Moving on to mining. Mining activities in North Sudan have spurred a lively economic distributive system in an otherwise desolate area of the country. In places like Nubia, a number of markets have spurred in response to the needs of the informal economic actors who actually have the ability to pay to access all forms of services, including luxurious ones. This has proven essential to the villages of in North Sudan pre the war, who have otherwise existed outside the realm of market state-sponsored provision. The markets themselves provide work for local communities and provide them with access to otherwise unavailable services across the spectrum, from medicine to food. This doesn't preclude the fact that their presence has been detrimental to the welfare of the local. So you've got issues like disorder, violence, illicit activities, and the use of banned substances to mine gold. All these have devastating effects on local communities. Post-war, these market installations have shrunk because of the hyper-militarization of the area by SAF and the presumption by locals that miners are somehow associated in one form or the other to RSF. So these huge markets that existed around Nubia that kind of catered to mining have now kind of shrunk in size, and in other areas stopped altogether. Smuggling, moving on to smuggling. Smuggling and illicit economic activities underpin all market activities, including the ones that have kind of developed post-war. All essential products, non-perishable goods, fuel, technology, and now even small arms, guns, are smuggled in mainly through Libya. The state itself, though indirectly, facilitates the networks, these illicit networks, by taking a cut at entry and throughout its various checkpoints. In the absence of any other clear means of managing state affairs, it seems like that has become, or smuggling has become, the sole means of raising revenue for state actors. And even though this revenue goes mostly to kind of managing security affairs of the state in the north, it's still kind of a viable activity. So the illicit network facilitates movements both ways, mostly of people leaving and goods coming in. So post-war, a lot of people who are actually looking to kind of migrate do so illegally, especially after Egypt closed its borders. And we're talking about people who don't have enough cash to kind of relocate or migrate legally or in official terms. So they do so illicitly through these same kind of networks, counterbound networks. So you've got people going out and goods coming in. Both have taxes paid on them. Now the final point that I wanted to kind of the final factor in the political economy of North Sudan post-war is labor. There's so many facets to the politics of new labor surplus in the area of North Sudan, but of particular interest is the reconstitution of the economic model of the North as a result of the relocation of urban communities to peripheral villages. Now, they arrive with the financial means to invest in sectors that have otherwise been neglected. Specifically, farming on the banks of the Nile is one. And even though they don't possess the technical know-how, of how to, turn desert into arable land, they come with ideas that kind of, push large-scale investment in local communities, mostly through financing, that could end up creating new markets and value chains in the area, but possibly at the negative cost of unsettling previous land relations, and with them, obviously, a change in communal politics. I think it's also important to kind of try and explore what does it mean to bring national urban politics by these same groups to a neglected province at a time of national war. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to stop here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, for both presentations. Should we collect some precise questions or directly go to the debates for the last half an hour?
There is.
So, yeah, either direct questions to Raja's intervention or transversal ones.
Me, I have, but I don't know if you have any idea, but I would be very interested if you have idea on how works the post-war economy regarding to livestock, exportation, for example. I don't know, because you mentioned it's also a big sector in Sudan. So if you have any information about how it's work and where is the livestock now, and if there is, yeah, but I can imagine that it's very difficult to have some idea. But if you have, I would be very, very glad. With Egypt, but also for the exportation to the Gulf countries, for example, for the Eid, for the next Eid, let's say.
Yeah, so as I've kind of highlighted in the beginning, that's that this kind of violence that has overtaken Sudan is not new, and even though that it's kind of it's developed kind of quite a bit in relation to scale at a level levels that are unprecedented. This violence itself is kind of it underpins the kind of productive nature of Sudan's economies, right? And to that, in that sense, and I don't have any kind of data to back this up, but the exportation process of Sudan's economy has not stopped even after the war. So the main 4 items that kind of that have historically brought in a lot of foreign exchange, which is gold, livestock. Well, in this particular case, gold and livestock, as well as oil, have not stopped. The exportation process has not stopped. And I imagine because the same people, the same groups, the same violent actors that are producing mayhem in Khartoum now are also kind of organizing the process of violence in the peripheries where these products are being exported. So it's functional violence in the sense that it kind of disrupts where it needs to, and kind of organizes functional productivity even through extraction in other places as required. So from what I've heard, the exportation of livestock to Egypt as well as to Saudi has not stopped, has not been disrupted, and neither has the export of agricultural products that have historically been produced by Sudan for Egyptian markets. These 2 are still ongoing.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think it's around in 23, it's around 5 million livestock. It's the highest estimate. It's more than 2011. It's the highest estimate. It's 5 million, and the plan of the government it's 6 million.
Yeah.
If I may, from
yes.
Question. Yes, I was wondering whether you have any idea about the role of Wagner in the smuggling of gold, and also about the production of gum arabic. because it was reported in the newspapers that the patients who were having their crops of Arabic gum were not able to sell it.
I'm sorry, I don't have any particular information about these two
Okay,
two topics. I'm sorry.
I think Arabic gum has been, for the little I know, Arabic gum has been always smuggled through Chad for quite some time. So it's going to continue. I don't believe that, you know, I mean, in the presentation, you know, I believe a number of the business continues, but the value added change because transportation and some taxes, some links to checkpoints and so on are going to grow. But the whole structure will look the same. And is what is happening for livestock export is going to happen for gold or for Arabic gum. It's not. I doubt that that there would be major changes. I mean, it's a very specific war by which it's very limited. I'm sorry to say. I mean, it's very bloody, but the battlefront is actually very limited compared to the magnitude of the country.
Thanks.
Question from Rifat.
Okay, first and foremost, I do appreciate the opportunity provided to pose a question. And in the context of the political economy of Sudan, how do the historical roots of conflict manifest in contemporary political and economic structure in Sudan? And what the lessons can be drawn from the historical pattern? I also have another question. Can you identify any potential avenues for economic and political reform that could contribute to a more stable and prosperous Sudan in the post-conflict period?
Oh, ambition.
Raga, you want to answer or you want to start?
No, okay. The fundamentals of the economy are not going to change. Okay, and I think the fact that Sudan is able to survive this war, whatever casualties, means that it's going to stay as it is. So what you may have to discuss, maybe, and that could be a follow-up to the presentation made by my colleague, would be one, and you haven't much mentioned it, is the future of Jazeera scheme. I mean, because that's so big, maybe that's the elephant in the room. And it's and really that raised so many issues linked to electricity supply, input supply, and so on, and the ability to produce, you know, in a congruent manner with world price and so on. So that's a question, and I believe this is a big question. That was a question for the regime under Bashir. That was a question for Hamdouk. And now, of course, they are procrastinating because of the war situation, but still is a major issue. The other one, which maybe deserve more discussion here, is as well the ability of the state to enforce economic policies, public policies. You know, it's a long time I haven't worked on the economy. Well, that's years. But one point always struck me in my trips in the 2010s was the fact that, for instance, there is an investment code, but that's not what is enforced by state agencies. So taxes are raised on companies that are not supposed to pay taxes. The amount of taxes vary according to the man who is in front of you. And this is not corruption, okay? It is maybe incompetency, maybe is the lack of clarity in the way the law is implemented. But this, of course, creates a situation by which foreign investors, including Gulf investors, may rely on, may decide to procrastinate or look for other places to invest. I mean, certainly Ethiopia, whatever is happening there today is much safer in terms of legal framework than Sudan. And this is a legacy of Omar al-Bashir regime. So the question will be, okay, even if you solve the political issues, you get a wonderful peace, everyone is kissing the other in the streets of Khartoum or Wad Medani and El Obeid, what's going to happen on those issues? Are the civil servants going to enforce the law, or everyone is going to have his own reading of the law, independently of what has been decided by the parliament, by the state years ago? These are questions about the day-to-day functioning of the state that should be part of any reflection on the political economy, whether of war or of peace.
Okay, Raja, did you want to add something to answer, or no?
No, I think Professor Marchal covered that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for you, Raja. Thank you very much. You talk about what is happening just now with the economy, and I was wondering how it is the banking system, because if there is a business as usual, I think there are some people using cash, other maybe gold, other using, I don't know how it...
Bangkok.
But Bangkok is not functioning very well. So did you work on it a bit?
Okay. Well, I mean, I did come across financial transactions as kind of, a daily struggle in the reality of post-war Sudan. And in the North specific, again, it really depends to a huge degree on the kind of the specific features, the specific political economy features of these areas themselves. The North, for example, has historically been known to espouse a model where it is reliant or economically dependent on remittances of extended family members who exist in the diaspora. So the North itself is not, it doesn't have an urban kind of, economic structure as the one that you would find in Khartoum or even, other provincial places. And so to this end, there's not been a major disruption in terms of how people go about, financing their daily needs. Western Union still kind of functions in larger kind of, cities like Dongola. So people are able to receive money as well as send money to other places in around Sudan. Bangkok is actually more functional than people realize. The only disruptions have to do with the availability of electricity at times and a very slow network. But the app itself and the system is very functional. More important, the existing social kind of, trust networks in place, especially in a place, like Northern Sudan, where people have gone back to their kind of homestead villages, where they have kind of extended ancestral relations, has meant that it's easy to deal with debit and credit. Right? I mean, people know you and they know your extended family. So if you can't access your online banking account for some reason, you can still get what you need without major problems. So the reality is that, these financial kind of, these kind of traditional mainstream financial systems are supplemented to a large degree with social systems, right? And kind of communal networks that allow for, the extension of credit and, kind of, exchange of services without monetary kind of, exchanging hands immediately anyway. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had maybe a question for two connected questions, maybe. The first one would be on the to Raja, rather, I think, on the material infrastructures behind these economic sectors, like where are the machines for agriculture or mining coming from? Are they like nationally produced or are they imported? And maybe this is connected to my second question, which is about the role of a country we didn't speak about, which is Turkey. And I think it's a very present actor in, especially in Khartoum, but maybe in generally in the country. And maybe they are playing a role in importing this machine or acting in specific sectors. And I don't know, yeah, maybe for decades actually. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, in terms of input to kind of, finance and kind of, drive the productivity of major economic sectors, I'm not sure about, I mean, this is the other thing when it comes to Dongola specifically, I don't know to what degree I can corroborate this, but Dongola seems to be the last kind of, holdout of Islamists post the 2018 revolution. Ideologically, politically, but also in terms of how the markets in Dongola function. It's very kind of, Islamic, mercantile kind of style of, functioning. The degree of conservatism as well and the absence of all kind of revolutionary discourse or features kind of speaks to how, I mean, what kind of social and political control the Islamists still continue to hold over Dongola. To this extent, it's also it's by extension, it's also extremely militarized as a space. So it's difficult to kind of get a sense of how agriculture in Dongola is financed. I mean, what kind of private sector money, what kind of private mercantile sector money comes kind of finance these activities and in what form? This, in addition to the fact that these plains that I'm talking about are separate from the city, they are at a, kind of a removed distance. So it was also kind of difficult to kind of, see them or observe them firsthand. So in that sense, it really did feel like a state-controlled project in the sense that it was removed from kind of, direct, from the, from the direct gaze, that it existed kind of beyond a certain bound, and there was no information on how it's financed. The mining sector is the opposite extreme, at least in northern Sudan, in Nubia. It's mostly informal, and the kind of financing that you imagine exists. I mean, I think the way that it operates is that people take kind of credit from kind of either local merchants or kind of financial backers at small scale, at obviously huge interests, to then be paid at a later date when they're able to extract, if they're successful in extracting gold. Another model that I've noticed is that in the area itself, locals who have claim over the land, who own patches of the land, enter into these kind of agreements or partnerships, economic partnerships with gold miners, where they provide the land and the miners themselves kind of, contribute with their labor. And then there's some sort of formula for the division of profits. Now, the state, even though it doesn't kind of, enter into the equation with huge financing or kind of control and management of land, it is somewhat involved even if at a distance. And it does so through kind of, local governance mechanisms. Yeah, I mean, I hope I've managed to answer your question, even if to a degree.
On the role of Turkey?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm an ignorant person.
Are they other questions? Yeah, Harry Cross.
Yeah, Henry.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the great event. I wanted to ask, take Raga up on a point when you say that Dongolas may be the last holdout for the Islamists. I want to just push you on what you mean by that, because everyone's a Muslim, right? So I guess what you mean is people sort of aligned with the NCP or the NCP model or the NCP idea. But as we've discussed through the seminar, that's not just a party affiliation, that's a whole sort of sociology and structure of how Sudan functioned. And especially now that the sort of civilian transition, the sort of anti-NCP sort of failed between 2019 and 21 for all sorts of reasons, is there a risk that sort of, as heroic activists and academics, with one foot in the West, we sort of look at Sudan, we look at the 2019 revolution, and we see what we want to see, and we think, oh, everyone's a sort of secular, left-leaning, you name it, sort of activist. Oh, and these people in Dongola who are telling the otherwise, they're the exception. So I just wanted to push you to be more specific on what you mean by that, and is there a risk that we're seeing what we want to see?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a very good question, Harry. And also, hello, it's been a while. So, I mean, to claim that the revolution, where it happens, the movement in the center, in the urban center of the country is leftist or secular, is also a misrepresentation of, the complex dynamic and the contradictions inherent to it. I mean, just in terms of, let's say, gender politics, which is the most, basic example, there's been a lot of, complaints by women, rank and file of, the movement itself about the problematic behaviors towards them, the repression, the tendency to kind of turn to, Bashir era kind of social values to try and dictate how women should behave, when operating on the political spectrum. So these binaries themselves kind of, they're infactual. But also I have to say that if we're taking the revolution as a starting point and measuring the kind of evolution or development in social and political consciousness in Sudan, I would say there is a kind of a huge and palpable kind of, difference between what exists in Khartoum today and what exists on the other side in Dongola. And one just example to show what kind of how this kind of operates is that the people who are overseeing the day-to-day management of the displaced community in Dongola, the people who have come from Khartoum and other areas, there's a huge displaced community in Dongola who live in kind of makeshift camps. They live in schools and other places that the local authorities have designated to them. So while in other places in Sudan, these communities are being kind of, attended and catered to by the movement, in Dongola that doesn't exist. It's either hack or kind of, local initiatives that have spurred more recently after the war of, young people who kind of, do fundraising in order to provide for the needs of the displaced community. And when I asked them why, when I asked them where the resisting committees were, where I asked them where the movement was, they told me that these formations, these structures, they don't exist in this place, and they never will. And they seem to have a quite strong position on what the resistant committees, or what the ideas of kind of young social kind of political mobilizations in Khartoum. They seem to have like a presupposed ideas of what they are, and the fact that they see them as a scourge and that would never kind of develop or take root in a place like Dongola. And they do cite religious factors. I mean, whereas in other places, mobilization, political mobilization, humanitarian mobilization around the needs of displaced communities comes from a political discourse that had emerged in the aftermath of the 2018 revolution. In Dongola, it is more religious discourse, right? They quote the Quran, they quote the Hadith, and it's also observable on the streets. I mean, if anything, Dongola reminds me of what Khartoum was in the late 90s, before the CPA agreement. There's a lot of women who, you didn't see women on the street. If they were out, they dressed in a certain way. There was complete separation of the sexes, and there's no political activity whatsoever. So I mean, but I'm very aware of what you mean, Harry, about the need to kind of problematize and kind of synthesize, make more norms, the dynamics of these different places and how they operate.
Yeah, if I could come back, I mean, it's a really interesting answer, so thanks. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just pushing this point of what do we mean specifically by Islamist as compared to another sort of political, cultural, religious set of views, and in what extent is it exceptional? And I don't have the sort of local knowledge of, city by city, so I'm not trying to contradict anything you're saying. But yeah, I think it's interesting because it could point to both, firstly, was there an anti-revolution constituency in Sudan that a lot of people kind of missed at the time? And secondly, can people move between those sort of different political positions a lot more easily again than people might have initially thought? Were there many people who maybe supported the revolution as a way of ending very violent sort of military police state, but actually are very easily able to then slip back into what you've described as a very religious discourse? And I obviously suspect that people can, and the conditions will have led to that happening. But it's really interesting. So thanks for your answer.
If you allow me, when you look what happened with Enqaz, at first they really quoted people in the countryside, so they offer services that never existed before. They, in the constitution of in building up the NCP, as well, they quoted local, shares and personalities and so on. So the question is, or they created universities in so many areas, schools, high schools and so on. This system collapsed after 2011 because the money wasn't there. Now, you could say, as in Khartoum, as in big cities, okay, those responsible for this collapse are the NCP leaders, the government, because they took all the money, they became very rich, and we became very poor. Now, in the countryside, it's less clear, because you could always blame others, and you don't blame your sheikh, even if he has become richer, because he's not that rich. And so, one problem with the social movements that took place in late 2018 and early 2019 was that the revolt was, of course, urban, and you won't blame people for that, but you could blame the civilian organizations after August, because they did little to reach out people in the regions and try to explain why so many bad things happened to them. and not blame the West, but blame the corruption of the very shares and political party they had been supporting for years. And this didn't take place. That's the point. That's why the NCP still has constituency in rural areas, and what we call Islamist in that sense is a bit overstated. I mean, we talk about people who might actually be conservative, people who would like to get back to a certain sense of prosperity that they benefited for a few years. And they believe that with Omar al-Bashir, it was possible, and with the new government, it wasn't. It isn't. And that's the point. I mean, that's a difficult issue for civilian forces now, the post-revolutionary civilian forces, because of course what they would say, and rightly so, is that, you know, we have been part of this dynamic. We need time to organize ourselves, get a clear vision of what could be done and not only what should be done. And we need time to act. And the time to act was taken over by the military and the RSF.
Maybe we'll have like a last question or a comment from Suleiman.
Yeah, comment, and I would like some response to that from Mr. Raga, Makawi, and Roland. When you look at the territorial control between the belligerents today, it's basically Western Sudan in the hands of the rapid support forces, and now this incursion in Jazeera state, but mostly the Sudan Armed Forces, the establishment behind it, what stands for a government in Port Sudan, are in control, between brackets, of northern states, central states, and eastern states. This brings to mind or throws us back to the idea of Hamdi's triangle, which the Islamist movement developed as a result of the independence of South Sudan and the dwindling of resources available to the state. Minister of Finance at the time argued that the National Islamic Front should focus on developing central northern Sudan and ignore the other peripheries, using their connections to the Gulf countries to bring foreign direct investments in developing these parts. This was an ideology developed during the oil years, and while Sudan was gaining a lot of revenue from the oil exports at the time, it still contracted huge debts from Chinese export bank, which were primarily invested in northern states and River Nile states and in central, central Sudan, including Marawi Dam, by the way, for which more than 4 something billions were used for the building of the dam. The attitude of the government in Port Sudan today is reminiscent of the ideology of Hamdi's triangle. There is no reference in their discussions of what should be done in terms of government intervention in areas of Western Sudan that are under the control of the rapid support forces. Although these areas remain the responsibility of the state and the responsibility of what stands for a government. For instance, when the relevant ministers discussed the importation for strategic commodities for the agricultural sector, it didn't even occur to them to see if they could also direct some of those inputs to agricultural producers in the western states of the country, which are half of the states, So that's one thing. Today, the government in Port Sudan has barred humanitarian deliveries to Darfur, although the situation there is very dire in terms of humanitarian need and spreading famine and starvation. So I don't know whether Raja or all have seen evidence of the resurgence of this ideology of Hamdi triangle in the thinking and practice of Port Sudan government. This is, I think, my question. Thank you.
That will be for the next seminar, but that's a very good question.
Okay, let's discuss it next time. Yeah, but I'm aware of the time. Also, sorry about that. If you have, if you have any comment or thought, even very brief, that will.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can, yes.
Okay, good. That's a very, like Professor Roland said, that's a very important but also complicated question that I don't think there's an easy response to, or at least I don't have one. But I wanted to say that in the case of Hamdi's triangle, I mean, at least the way that I have understood it, that it was more of a reactionary policy to kind of, the state's inability to kind of, control its territory in a viable way, in a way that the states usually do. So it's so these economic models are preemptive of a violent process of fragmentation in which the state itself is not in control, but acts in response or in reaction. So I think maybe in studying Sudan moving forward, the idea of a failed state should be maybe replaced by fragmentation, or fragmentation as a process of governance, especially as the state in Sudan kind of proved itself too weak to force its hegemony or dominance over kind of, peripheral locations, and where its, authority, it's countered by other actors who hold the monopoly of violence and challenge its own. I'm sorry, I know this is not it's not a a straightforward response, but yeah.
Sorry, just in response, Raja, I think what you said is very
Suleiman, really, you were already very. When this story about the triangle came up, it created actually a lot of disagreements among the Islamists themselves. And I believe, again, we should. What certainly is motivating today Burhan and others is RSF shouldn't benefit from anything we are importing and so on. So they don't care about the population. They just believe that let us, make it weaker and weaker by not providing even oxygen. I doubt that, in the ideology of the South, as Sudan armed forces, they have, and this is one thing they swallow so painfully in 2011, I think they would have problems to give up parts of the territory because, quote unquote, they believe that this area is populated only by bastards, because it's not true. Even they have their own, representative of their own communities are living in Western Sudan. And the red line, I would say, doesn't exist. It exists politically because of RSF, but it doesn't exist socially because, okay, they don't like Darfuri, but then in Darfuri, who is who, there are a lot of confusion and people do not actually agree that much, even among the hardliners. So I believe their current stance, the fact that they prohibit aid, is something that has to be highlighted, because that's criminal in all letters. But at the same time, I doubt that what is motivating them is the Hamdi dragon. Hamdi is just an extremist among extremists, and he was, later on he was even cornered within the Islamist movement for being so little attached to what the Sudanese identity is. And actually, I don't believe he spent most of his time outside the country. This man is well, we have, in all countries, we have this kind of figures. And it's not a gift of God, let us say.
Well, thank you very much for attending.
Next one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raja and Roland, for your presentations and for the discussion. We'll be happy to see you at the next session, which will be about water and energy resources during March.
No, on the 14th.
14th of March, after 10 days. So if you are available, see you very soon. And thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Raja.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, and happy to meet you all as usual. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.